Termo to Madeline, audio edition. New section titled The Homestead Era, page 166, and the chapter's title is Tule Lake Land and Irrigation Company. Olte McCabe ushers in a new era. In August of 1906, water first flowed down the ditches of the Tule Lake Land and Irrigation Company's water system. The main ditch ran as far as the Williams Ranch. And that first year, the extent of the company's irrigation was to wet the ditch's bottom and nothing more. The company had been in existence for a couple of years, but was already running out of money to finance its projects. Lack of financing was to be one of the major problems, both with the irrigation effort and with its successors. The only difficulty involved with the entire irrigation scheme that ever superseded money shortages was the problem of excess enthusiasm on the part of the promoters. Olte McCabe was the genius behind the Tule Lake Land and Irrigation Company. Matt Haley's estate had barely been settled when Olte went to work on the idea. The scheme was to dam up the drainage from Tule Lake and allow all the waters of Cedar Creek to flow into it. Then, by means of a tunnel on the west side of the lake, they would take the water down onto the Madeline Plains. Olte had the initial survey made in 1903, and it was determined to be a feasible plan. Then is when he encountered the first financial difficulties. Capital was needed in far greater amounts than Olte could come up with. A dam would have to be built. Also, 1/4 of a mile of tunnel would have to be blasted through a lava ridge. Miles of ditches and canals would have to be dug, and right-of-ways have to be obtained across other people's land. All of these things would have to be accomplished before he could convince anyone to settle on the land and then buy a water contract. Olte had some capitalist friends in Alturas by the name of Albert F. Chartel and Benjamin F. Linep. Linep was the cashier of the First National Bank of Alturas. They agreed to help with the financing as far as they could, and then it was agreed they would unload the whole scheme on the first prospective buyer who would come up with the right kind of profit for them. The Tule Lake Land and Irrigation Company was officially incorporated on December 1st, 1904, by Linep, McCabe, and Chartel, and 2 of their wives, Mary H. Linep and Edna McCabe. A week later, they had surveyors up at the Tule Lake running a line for the proposed irrigation ditch. That was as far as they got, however, before they started to advertise that the system was for sale. Starting in the first days of January 1905, Linep started sending letters to capitalists, real estate promoters, and the like, advertising the favorable terms that could be arranged. He undoubtedly received many inquiries and proposals concerning the project, but the one that ultimately bore fruit came from a gentleman in Spokane, Washington, on January 19, 1905. Linep made the following proposal to him, quote, Mr. J. Noble Jones, Empire State Building, Spokane, Washington. Dear Sir, I have your valued favor in relation to the irrigation system which we had under construction, and owing to the fact that the engineers in charge been unable to make the desired report, I have delayed answering until the present time. I have written the engineer to furnish the desired report, and he was promised to have the same ready in a few days. As soon as the same is completed, I will forward the same to you. We would be willing to make very favorable terms and would require 25 or 30% payment down as evidence of good faith. If this should be satisfactory, we believe that it would be fair and right to divide the commission between the Tule Lake Land and Irrigation Company and the purchaser, or if you desire, to have 10% paid by us. We would ask enough more of the price, so that 10% would be paid by our company. Kindly let me hear from you in regard to these matters, and by the time I receive your reply, the engineer will have the report ready to send to you. I will be glad to receive any suggestions from you in regards to what is customary in such transactions. I am, yours truly, B.F. Linep. Unquote. It would be almost 3 years before a contract would finally be signed, placing control of the proposed irrigation system in Jones' hands, however. In the meantime, it was up to Olte and Company to start building the system. Olte sold all of his likely properties in March and began investing the money on the project. The first step was to build a cookhouse and sleeping apartment at the site of the proposed tunnel. Lige Cadell, a former hired hand of George Bailey, who eventually took up a homestead on the plains, hauled the lumber up to the site from Jess Valley Mill with a jerkline team. He also brought lumber into Madeline so Olte could have a new house built for him and his family. Once the lumber was on the ground for the new building, Lige started freighting the timbers in for the new tunnel. John Roberts, an Alturas carpenter, moved up to take charge of the construction of the houses. Contracts were let for the surveying and building of the system. John Williams was the surveyor in charge, and Old Johnson was put in charge of the tunnel construction. Within a couple of months, Old and his wife and daughter Carrie were moved into the new cookhouse on the tunnel site. Work was first begun on the dam on the east side of the lake. It was built with horses and scrapers up to the height of nearly 6 feet. It did not take long to finish, however, as there was only about 250 feet to build. By the 1st of April 1905, active operations were started on the tunnel. It would be 16 months before it would be completed, however. Work was started on the outlet side. The going was relatively easy at first, as they were in a crumbly soil. The slowest part of the excavation for the first 100 feet or so was timbering the unstable shaft. For the first few months the workers progressed at a pace of about 100 feet a month. In the first part of September they dug a vertical shaft down into the tunnel, set up a windlass, and began hauling the excavated materials out into the surface through it. The going was slow but steady, as the rock they were boring through was porous and easy to drill and blast. And yet it was stable enough that timbers were seldom needed. Then they hit a strata of solid blue lava, and things almost came to a standstill. Olte got some better drilling equipment and hired on another crew of men. Half of the workers started digging in from the lakeside, but they too immediately ran into solid lava. Blasting powder was being hauled up to the site daily. The NCO had built a powder house down at Madeline near the warehouse in 1904. It was filled to overflowing while the work was being done on the last 500 feet of the tunnel. Work was shut down at the end of January 1906 for almost 2 months. Conditions on the outside had gotten so wet and muddy that no one could move around with great difficulty. All this time, since they had commenced digging from both directions, John Williams had been fretting. He had never surveyed a project like a tunnel to begin with, and now, where the workers were proceeding towards each other from both ends, he was especially worried. By the time the work was started up again, he had other things to occupy his mind. A ditch had been dug down to Wilson Bailey's reservoir from the tunnel the fall before. Now work was begun on a ditch running from there down almost to the town of Madeline, and then west along the foothills to the Williams Ranch. And, of course, it was up to John Williams to survey the line. Because of his surveying, John Williams had obtained a guaranteed water right. His water right was only superseded by that of Wilson Bailey, who owned the reservoir that the company proposed using as a diversion dam. Olty had bought 40 acres from Austin Pino at the north end of Bailey's Reservoir, where his ditch came down from the tunnel. That gave him the right to bring his water to that point. But where Wilson owned the land, the dam was on, and since the water had crossed his land after its release from the reservoir, he was guaranteed first water right to the Tule Lake Land and Irrigation Company's water. Now, the ditch down to Bailey's Reservoir had been constructed by 2 crews of men, horses, and scrapers. One was headed by Will Smith and the other by Lige Cadell. They each supervised a crew of men on the ditch from the reservoir to the Williams Ranch also. But by now, Olty had hired a lot more men, and there were several crews going at once. It took them just over 2 months to dig the 4 miles of canal. When they finished the last 50 feet up on June 6, 1906, the tunnel only lacked a few feet of being completed. As the next few days progressed, everyone around Madeline waited anxiously for the news of the breakthrough. No one was as anxious as John Williams. The day the workers did break through, there was a group of men at the hotel, one of whom was Jim McCabe. He and Olty had had a falling out, and Jim was not the least bit impressed with Olty's high-powered irrigation scheme. He had leased the Tule Lake Ranch from Olty for a couple of years after Matt Haley's death, and now, with this irrigation project in the making, he was out in the cold, and all the hard years Matt Haley had put into building up a workable livestock operation were being frivolously wasted by Olty in a matter of months. That was Jim's opinion on the matter. A runner was sent down to Madeline from the tunnel site with the news that a breakthrough had been accomplished. Everyone at the hotel was excitedly talking about it when John Williams walked in. Quote, "Did you hear that they broke through at the tunnel?" someone asked. "No. How'd they come out?" John wondered. 6 feet from where they started, was Jim McCabe's sarcastic response. John did not know whether to laugh or cry for a moment, until he saw that everyone was having a good joke at his expense. The truth was, the walls of the tunnel had met perfectly true, and there had only been about a 6-inch difference in the floor of the 2 sides. John Williams' survey skills had triumphed once again. Over the next month and a half, workers finalized finishing touches of the tunnel. A concrete head gate with a 30-inch corrugated pipe through it was installed and a control valve put in place. Then the barrier that had been thrown up in front of the mouth of the tunnel to hold the water at Tule Lake back was removed, and water was allowed to flow through the tunnel and ditch system all the way to the Williams Ranch. The whole system was in working order, and everyone was excited, especially the promoters. Olty McCabe and B.F. Lineup had been busy selling the idea to people. They were promoting the idea of people taking up desert homesteads and then buying a water right from them. They had also been buying up land around Madeline and down the west side where they intended to continue their main canal from the Williams place. George Templeton sold the old Shaw place to the company in 1905 and moved into Ash Valley. Hank Langsdale sold his place to them in 1906 and moved himself and wife to Honey Lake. Now, the company had intentions of selling these and other pieces of land they had bought along with water rights to prospective subscribers. Either that, or they would unload the whole system if they could find the right buyer. They put out a brochure, which was circulated all over Northern California, telling of the resources, objects, aims, and capabilities of the Tule Lake Land and Irrigation Company. The interested reader was told, among other things, that, quote, "The company was purchased, Tule Lake Ranch, which includes Tule Lake, with the water rights thereunto belonging. The lake proper has a capacity of irrigating 80,000 acres of land. It covers an area of about 3,500 acres by turning in the waste waters of Cedar Creek and other streams in the vicinity, be made to drain a territory of 400 or 500 square miles. In this way, water can be stored in the lake every winter to a depth of 18 or 20 feet. In regard to qualities and conditions of the land, we herewith insert an extract from the report of Mr. W. D. Minclear, civil engineer and county surveyor. There is no possibility of overestimating the character of the soil. It is a rich, sandy loam, and capable of producing any kind of vegetation which can be grown in this climate." Unquote. So the brochure went on to tell how the sagebrush grew from 4 to 8 feet in height, and the larger the sagebrush, the better the land. The reader was informed how alfalfa, hay, timothy, rye, oats, or barley would yield well, and that the beef could be raised with splendid results. They further wrote, quote, "The potatoes grown here are certainly equal to the best Salt Lake or Humboldt's, and are bound to be a very remunerative crop for shipment. Cabbages of 35 to 50 pounds in weight are not unusual. The hardier fruits, apples, pears, plums, and berries, find their natural home in this region. The apple will strive with grain, vegetables, and alfalfa, in being the most important and profitable crop that will be raised on these lands when divided into small holdings." Unquote. So contracts were drawn up whereby a person could purchase an exclusive water right for 320 acres of desert land for $2,400 by paying $240 down when the land was filed on, and $240 plus 6% interest every year after for 10 years. And of course, on top of that expense, the homesteader had to pay 25 cents an acre to Uncle Sam for the 320 acres of desert homestead land when he filed on it. At the end of 3 years, when the land was proved up on, he had to pay another $1 an acre. The government was pushing the idea. The Tule Lake Land and Irrigation Company was pushing it, and plenty of people were anxious to try it. Now, by November 1906, 4,000 acres had been filed on under the system, which meant that around a dozen people had taken a gamble on it. Olte had a crew of 30 men clearing the land with teams, dragging railroad rails. Any one of the subscribers could contract to have their land cleared this way at a small added expense. Olte's scheme for an irrigation project was becoming a reality. The homestead boom was about to begin. Next chapter, titled Thanksgiving Day, 1906, page 177.